to the Tempum Institute's Q&A Tuesday. Today we have a question from Marianne that I've gotten asked so many dozens of times I can't even tell you. She wants to know how she can retain more of what she reads. We all want our reading experience to be valuable. Like, we put all this effort in and we want to take something from it and we want to remember what we've read, and there's nothing more frustrating than reading a book and really loving it and 2 or 3 years later somebody saying, "Oh, I read this great book lately," and you say, "I read that," and they say, "What was your favorite part?" or what did you like the most?" or "What did you think about it?" and you can barely remember. Sometimes you have a hard time even remembering what the plot was about or who some of the characters were. So I've got some really key things that you can do right now today to help you retain more of what you read. The most important thing, you probably saw it coming from all that we do here at the Tempum Institute, but the most important thing you need to do is mark your book. Now, the question we have to ask before we do any of this marking is, what do you want to remember from the book? If you're reading it because it was assigned in your English class, that's a different experience than reading it because you're going to have a book club on it, or because you want to, because you're going to read it out loud with your kids, or because you just want to read it because you've just heard really good things about it. Now, if you're reading it for your English class, then your teacher's going to tell you, your professor is going to tell you what they want you to get out of the book, what they want you to remember, and you can look for those things, and you can still use marking skills as you read those books to organize and retain what you read. But those marking skills are so critical because here's what happens. You're reading along and you run across something that you really like, and you read it once, and that's it. Now, we have so much information input every day in our lives, it's impossible for us to be able to recall even the very smallest percentage of that on demand. That's a tough thing. And so what you have to do is create those neural pathways in your brain, right? Like they're always shooting off and they're sending each other messages, and the more that you learn, the more connections there are in there, which is really super cool. And then you create pathways. When there's things that you do all the time, your brain, it's kind of like carving out a trench. Your brain is going to that pathway, and you can do it without thinking anymore. You can drive to work every day and you don't even consciously ever realize where you needed to turn or even think, even try to remember. You don't have to recall it. So the more times that you interact with any information, the better you're going to remember it. That's just a neurological fact. So when you start marking, when you've got a pen in your hand and there's something in the book that you like, even just the simple fact of underlining it, you know what that does? That sends your eyes across the page again, so you read it a second time. Now you've increased your ability to retain that sentence or sentences much higher than if you just read it once and never did anything with it. Now, when you have a physical action that accompanies it and you actually draw your hand along the page while you're reading, while you're rereading it as you mark, that physical action along with the thoughts that are going on in your mind as you reread this information, again, higher retention level of that information. Now, if you turn the page and you start making some notes on the side of the page, now what's happening is you're having an experience with that information. You may never be able to recall the exact words that were on that page, but for a long time afterward, you'll remember a certain concept because now you're discussing with the author something. Maybe you disagree, maybe you don't understand it, maybe you agree and you think it's marvelous and you're having some kind of insight about some important key relationship in your life or whatever it is. But now, as you interact, the amount of time that you're spending on that idea and the physical action of rereading it and writing about it skyrockets your retention on anything that you're reading. Now, if you go the next step, which is some key items that we talk about in how to mark a book. So if this is really important to you, I would highly recommend that you get How to Mark a Book and that you use some of those skills, because I promise you, you will be amazed how your retention just increases tenfold because you're marking properly. If you take the information that's on that page and you go to the front or back of your book and you organize that information, now not only do you have a much higher likelihood of remembering it for a long time, but you can find it again when you want to find it again. And that's the other thing that frustrates people like crazy It's one thing to retain it, just to recall it off the top of your head, and it's another thing to pick up a book and maybe you had your highlighter and you flip through there and you've got, which highlight is it? Where in the world was it? You know, there's 300 pages in this thing. How am I ever going to be able to find it again? And you flip for a little bit and you never find it, and then you're frustrated because you never can find it again. Another thing that you can do to increase your retention along with all those marking skills is to write up a thought paper on something that was of interest to you in that book. Because again, remember, when you ask the question, how can I retain more of what I read, the most important question is, how can I retain what's important to me? It doesn't matter if you remember a whole lot of specific details about a certain book or even who all of the characters were. What matters is that book changes you. That book means something to you. So I always recommend that people come up with one theme or one main idea from that book, and they write a little bit about it in the back of their book or in a notebook or on their computer. Some of their thoughts coming away from that book, so that always and forever you have this main theme, this main core idea of this book meant this to me. You know, Jane Eyre meant self-discipline, and Communist Manifesto meant force versus freedom. Whatever it is that you're reading and that you want to remember forever, make sure that you write it and think a lot about it. Now, you want to really just totally blow it, you know, hit it out of the ballpark with your retention, discuss it. I'm telling you, as soon as you start teaching something, here's what's important to know. We remember best what we say and what we think. Of course, we can't remember what somebody else's thinks, but as we think through it, the more time we spend thinking about a certain concept, the better we remember it. And then when we teach it, which is really what happens in a book club, is that you get around in a circle and you're teaching each other things and asking each other questions, and you keep interacting with this material and interacting and interacting. Now you've interacted with a core concept that was important to you from this book maybe 5, 6 times. You've read it once, you've read it again, you've marked it, you've thought about it, you've written about it, you've marked it in the back of your book, and you've gone to your book club, or you've sat down with a friend or with your spouse, or you've put it into some kind of form, bullet point form, and taught it to some audience. You will not forget that book. It will be meaningful to you. So this is why, you know, if you read a lot and you're just flying through books, you really aren't going to retain a whole lot. And if you're reading largely for entertainment, then your primary goal of being entertained was achieved. You read a book to be entertained and you were entertained. But if you want books to change you, if you want them to build your character, which is what we do here at the Temple Institute, if you want them to mean something to you and you want to take that information into the future with you for years to come, this is key. This is how you've got to do it. You've got to mark well and discuss what you read and write about what you read, and then you'll never forget it. So those are my tips for retaining what's most important to you in every book that you read. If this was helpful, please pass it on to a friend, and like us and pin us and whatever else it is that you love to do, and we'll see you next time.